Welcome to Every Step Podcast. I'm Christina Weston.
And I'm Judith Beck.
Every Step is the podcast where career and life meet.
With a new guest every episode, we explore the gutsy issues affecting everyone in the workplace.
Who doesn't love a good story? The more experiences we have, the more stories we collect along the way. We use these stories to share wisdom or as warnings to avoid the mistakes that we've made. Today, we're joined by Gabrielle Dolan, who after a long stint in corporate, now teaches people how to tell better business stories. Gabrielle is a well-known successful author, and her most recent is Magnetic Stories. Welcome, Gabrielle. It's fabulous to have you with us today.
Thanks, Christina. Really good to be here.
Today, we're going to be exploring the power of effective communication. I think that's a subject that you're very well versed in. As leaders, I observe that many of us have learned to be really direct and just get straight to the point. But is that really working for us?
I don't think so. Clearly sometimes that's warranted, but I've been doing this for 18 years, and I think one of the things I love about my job is when I teach people, senior leaders, how to tell stories better. Some of them just say to me after the training, it was like, it never even occurred to me to share stories to communicate. So it's sort of almost like feel like I give them permission to say, yes, it's okay, it is professional, but also the capability how to do it, because we need to adapt our communication style to the audience and the situation.
But does it mean we need to become sort of actors on the stage? I mean, part of it is about how do we tell those stories and stay true to who we are? Because some of us aren't good storytellers.
Yeah, so look, a couple of things in there. It is not acting on the stage. I think that's some of the concerns. People think, oh, you've got to be the big extrovert or whatever. It is absolutely sharing stories that mean something to you and in a way. So it's totally authentic and your style. This is like a day-to-day leadership and communication skill. So it's certainly not, acting, or in fact, I think when you're acting and putting it on, people actually see through that. So yeah, it's not about that. And I was going to say something else really insightful then, but I forgot. So I'm sure I'll come back.
Yeah, because it's easy for it to be contrived. If you're not a natural storyteller, it's easy for it to come across really contrived.
So what I was going to say, you just reminded me, we are all natural storytellers. So as humans, we are natural storytellers. But you're right, when sharing stories for a purpose in business and, we really want to get a message across, there's a skill involved. And definitely, like anything, some people are better at it than others. But it's a skill that can be taught and learned. So that is definitely the case. And yes, the one of the mistakes you can do is almost like over-script your story, so it feels contrived. Or the other thing about contrived is it's feeling like you're trying to manipulate. So to me, storytelling is about influence and it's about inspiring. The moment we try to do something that's either we don't believe in, it starts to feel like manipulation, and that is when it doesn't work.
Well, I always believe that with any kind of stories or anything that you're going to say in a work environment, well, one, the truth is easier to remember. So, keep that in your mind, then you'll think, okay. And when I know when I was advising candidates who were going for, when I was running my executive search business, who were going for jobs, storytelling came into telling about your achievements. And I used to say to them, you got to keep it simple. Like, what was that situation? How did you get there? And what was the result? Because you might have 10 achievements, and the person who's listening on the other side, they want to hear it, but they got to believe it. They've got to believe that you actually were the person who was responsible for that achievement. And if you can't tell that story about how you got there and what those numbers were and what the achievement was, they're probably not going to believe it.
Yeah. So there's two things I always say. The story's got to be true and believable. And they're very different things, because a story could be not true and believable. A story could also be true but not believable. So you've got to strike that balance of being true and believable. And you're absolutely right. When the story's true, it's much easier to remember. So when you tell a story and retell it, you don't just retell it, you relive it. So people sense that. And if it's made up or exaggerated to the point that's not true, people sense something. So if you're making up stories, that's when you want to be a really good actor. You need to be a really good actor if you're making stories up, and you want to have a brilliant memory because it will come undone. So, and the believable bit is, to me, when you're telling the stories about the great things you've achieved, I would actually focus more on the struggles you overcame or the lessons you learned, as opposed to the outcome you achieved. And I would almost avoid the step by step process, because that then starts to turn into a case study and not a story.
Well, I used to always say to him, you need to keep it within that 5-minute period, because
I even go, so Judith, I even go less than that. I go 90 seconds to no longer than 2 minutes.
Elevator pitch.
Yeah. And then people can then, especially in something like a job interview, keep it really short. And if they want to know more, they will ask more questions. And that is so much more engaging and better than just you rambling on for, 5 or 10 minutes in the one answer.
I love what you said.
It would also depend on the level that they're going for. So somebody in a junior level is going to need to keep it short and sweet, but somebody at a general manager level is probably going to have to give enough that then that person will probe more. But like you said, just give them enough for them to be interested to say, how did you do that?
Yeah, exactly.
Can you elaborate on that more and tell the story that way?
I love what you said about reliving it, because that then says to me it's about connecting to the emotion of the experience. And I've been watching all these idol shows, the singing competitions, and the single biggest criticism that the judges have of a lot of these singers is that they haven't actually connected to the message and the story of what they're doing. So when I heard you say you've got to relive it, it really made me think about connecting into the emotion, because it's the emotion of the experience that carries the story, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, if there's no emotion, there's no story. So again, just talking about case studies before. Case studies are not stories because they're a practical thing of what happened. There's very little emotion in them. There can be, depends on the way they're told. But you're right. When you retell a story and you relive it, you feel the emotion. So, it could be pride, it could be whatever. That's why sometimes when people start sharing the story, they go, oh my goodness, I don't know what's overcome. And they can feel the emotion, and it actually surprises them. Again, I see this all the time in my workshops. People will share a story and they'll go, oh, I don't know what's happening to me. I go, it's called emotion. It's okay. And you can't help that. You can't control, because again, it's human. So the story taps into emotion. And the benefit of that, the other side of that is, and there's all this research to show that when you share a story, people not only connect to the story, and they connect to the story because it taps into emotion, but they connect to you as the storyteller. So it starts to build trust and strengthen relationships. And I should just point out here, when I say emotion, I'm not talking about emotional, like you got to get all upset. As human beings, we are hardwired to tell stories. We're hardwired to listen to stories, and it taps into emotion. We have no control of it, but it just, that's the effect of a story.
Well, you kind of think that in a work environment, especially in today's work environment. So we're having Zoom meetings now all the time. Some people are going into the office, and there's a bit of a disconnect. I mean, how are we going to ensure that the next generations are going to be effective in storytelling? Because it is important, or be effective in communication, because it's all part of it. If you're able to communicate, well, then you can do this, you can learn the story part as well, and you'll be good at it after you practice and people mentor you as well. Have you seen a lot of changes in the work environment lately over the last year or so of what's happening in that regard?
I absolutely have. So when COVID hit and we went all into lockdown, so we were physically disconnected from everyone, interest in storytelling soared. So I was just getting phone calls from everyone saying we still want to do professional development, and we think storytelling would be a good way to make that connection because we are physically connected. So I think COVID has made people realize the importance of connection. And when you can't get the physical connection, you need to have the emotional connection, and storytelling does that. I also think, we're still doing a lot of Zoom meetings and virtual calls. The one thing a really well told story grabs people's attention. And so if you're running a virtual meeting, even just with your team, we all know that when we're in a virtual situation, there's so many more distractions. I mean, people are checking their phone, they're patting the cat, they're probably walking around listening to it and cooking dinner. So there's so many more distractions going on that a story will actually get people's attention back. So storytelling has become, even people see it as more critical in a virtual world, and absolutely just vital when, we are more physically disconnected. And even, we're never going to be going back into the office 5 days a week again. And believe me, I think that's one of the great things that have come out of COVID. So leaders need to find a way to connect and engage, and storytelling is one of the most powerful skills they can learn to do that.
Yeah, because we're all after community. We're all after a sense of belonging. And how else do we connect unless we're authentic, unless we're real, unless we, I guess people don't really think about it as storytelling, but it's about drawing people in with real information and real experiences that are told cleanly and simply.
Yeah. And it's Christina, I often say, we've, for years and years and years, we've been talking about bring your whole self to work. And what it took was a global pandemic and for everyone to work from home, that we literally saw this tiny glimpse, this square on a Zoom call into their life. And all of a sudden people are going, oh, I didn't know you had a cat, or I didn't know you had a kid, or is that guitar in the background yours? I didn't know you played guitar. And that, just this tiny little box on a screen, gave us a glimpse into people's life. Now that's not storytelling, but the reality is people will tell a story. It was like, oh, how did you get into surfing or whatever it is? And they will by default tell a story because they're humans.
Yeah,
well,
the intimacy level shifted.
It's kind of like in the old, when we went from offices to open plan and hot desking, so many people complained because they thought that was going to take away the ability to walk by someone's desk and see a photo of their family and break the ice and say, oh, is that your family? Or, oh, your team, or, those icebreakers. So therefore, when hot desking came, everybody had to put everything in their lockers. So that took away that sort of random type conversation. Well, now at least with Zoom, like you said, someone has a surfboard behind in the scene. They can say, "Oh, you surf? Oh, you do." So it can be an icebreaker for them. But I'm curious to know on what about in a work environment and storytelling. What happens when people overshare? How is that affecting? How can that affect their job? Like if they're going, well, I'm going to share, something that's really personal, and I'm overshared. What happens?
Yeah, that can be a problem. But Judith, I think we are so far away from overshare. Like I've been doing this for nearly 18 years, and I think I could count on my hand the examples of people going too far. And that happens for a couple of reasons. One is they actually don't realize the impact of what they're saying, that it could be taken the wrong way. The main reason, and is done because they haven't healed from what they're talking about. So they're talking about something that is still so raw for them. And it's potentially maybe not oversharing, but the end result is everyone feels sorry for them or whatever. So it doesn't then achieve its purpose. So I always say heal before you reveal, or someone said it another way once that I really liked: share scars, not wounds. So wait till you've there's some space. But there's very few people that overshare. And, and again, sometimes when I see people doing this without the skilling, that's what they think it is, and that's what they think vulnerability is. Because there's a lot of talk about vulnerability at the moment, and I do believe that the very best storytellers step into vulnerability, but vulnerability isn't about oversharing. So it's something you got to be careful of, but I think it's a very, a very big line. So it's not a thin line. It's you just need to be mindful of that.
So we're still a bit uptight, and we're still a bit controlled, and we come to work with a mask, and we want them to believe the persona that we come to work with, that we're not actually bringing our whole selves in yet.
Yeah, exactly. And look, some people are different and some cultures are different, but the vast amount of my work I'm doing, and especially with leaders, is to say, it's okay to share that. It's okay to say how you really felt. Sometimes leaders will share a story and they'll say something like, I was anxious. And afterwards I go, well, you're just anxious because that sounded terrifying. And they'll go like, to tell you the truth, it was the scaredest I've ever been in my life. And it was like, well, can you say that? Because that feels real. Scaredest I've ever been in my life. Anxious is still very, very safe. So I think if there's a problem between oversharing and there's a problem of not sharing enough, we are so in the league of not sharing enough.
But with the leaders who are having to manage their teams in remotely, a lot of times with being able to communicate with them, you would get the cues from working with them in the same environment. So now they've got to try to get that cue of if somebody is not sure or doesn't know enough about the product or the process or whatever. Because a lot of the storytelling in an office environment, I would think, would be explaining something to your team in a way that it's, instead of just saying, just do this, we're doing this project because it's going to bring this business to the organization. It's going to be good for the customers, and these are the reasons why. So that kind of story, that is a form of storytelling, to be able to get that message across. You're delivering it to, so they understand and have buy-in.
Yeah. So absolutely, storytelling is critical around a few things. Communicating your company's values and culture, you need to do that through stories. You can't just say, oh, we're a company that values diversity and work-life balance. It was like, so what? You need to share stories around that. Sharing stories about why we're doing the change is definitely why this is important. But then you'd be sharing a lot of, like customer stories or employee stories. So to me, it's about finding the messages you need to communicate and then communicating them using a whole different amount of story. So I guess for the leader, it's their job to communicate it at the start, but then you're right, you've got to find a way to, well, why aren't they following the process? Now, if it's something like, why aren't they following the process? You don't keep going on and on with logic, because logic just informs. It's like how you could share a story. I've been involved in organizational change for over 30 years, and I would absolutely say that the vast majority of why it fails or why it doesn't achieve the best it's meant to achieve is because leaders communicate it with logic and they stay on logic. And all logic does is inform people. It does not influence them, and it certainly does not inspire them.
Yeah. So it's really about being very intentional and structured about the communication. If it's something really important, like a transformational change, or you're changing the nature of the workplace or how people are going to work. So I guess what I'm hearing is that as leaders, we're still going about it the old way and we're just winging it. We're not actually putting enough intentionality around our messaging and really thinking and structuring our communication to convey both the logic and the story.
Yeah. And I actually call, what I call it strategic storytelling. This has absolutely been strategic and deliberate in the way you communicate. And Christine, I think you're right. A lot of leaders still do not understand that the biggest part of their role is communicating. That is their job, whether it's the CEO or senior leader of your team. And it's not their job to get it. It's your job to help them get it. So you do need to go through. To give you a quick example, I'll work with I work with a company and I'll work with, say, their senior leadership team or top couple of hundred leaders, and they're about to roll out new values. So they've got their values and they're communicating them, or they might have even had them for 3 months and they want to communicate them through stories. And let's just say one's integrity. I will pick one of the senior leaders and go, okay, so one of your values is integrity. Just just tell me what that means to you personally. Like, don't worry about what the company says. What does it mean to you personally? And they'll go, well, it means, telling the truth, I guess. What else does it mean? And they'll go, gee, you've put me on the spot here. I really haven't thought about it this much before. And so these would be the senior execs. And I guarantee you, this would happen 95% of the time I run training. And I'm not blaming them. It's just going, they haven't gone through the process yet to say, what does this really, really mean to me personally? And especially around something around values and cultural change. If you don't understand what it means to you personally as a leader, then how are you going to live that? How are you going to communicate it? How are you going to share stories about it? And how are you going to do things that role model that value? So you've got to be really, really clear on what the message you're trying to get across. And then I would say, have you got a personal story to help communicate that?
That's so interesting, because I remember one time I was doing an assignment for a large insurance company. It was for a head of marketing. And the MD got me in there and he said, you see this manual here? It was about an inch thick. He said, have a look. I flicked through it. It was full of jargon, full of all kinds of stuff. He goes, I want someone who can take that manual and bring it down to about 10 pages at the very most. He goes, get rid of the jargon. He goes, because I can't even understand it.
Yeah.
And so the message was very clear. He wanted somebody who knew how to communicate what they were doing in an easy way that everybody can understand, which is marketing 101, isn't it? So a 12-year-old should understand what the marketing plan says. And
Yeah, don't get me started on jargon. I've started a whole movement called Jargon-Free Fridays. Jargon, the unnecessary use of jargon and acronyms just kills communication. And the business world have become obsessed with acronyms. Like something's 3 words and we reduce it to an acronym, and it really causes miscommunication at the worst. It's just downright lazy in a lot of cases, because every time you use an acronym, people then have to interpret what that means, and you just better hope that they interpret it the way you expect it to be interpreted, because for every single acronym you use, there are multiple variations of that same acronym.
It becomes exclusionary language. People don't feel included, especially when it's peppered with TLCs. Yep. There we go. I just did it.
Yeah.
It's not good.
And some people use it deliberately for that, to exclude people.
Most people, terrible.
I know. Look, most people don't. Most people just aren't aware. They say it. So they're using it internally, perhaps with their team. And then they go speak, it could even be in the same company, but, people in finance will have their own set of acronyms, and risk will have their own, marketing and IT, and you're using acronyms and you're making an assumption that someone understands, that it's the same thing. A little fun fact, the word acronym only entered the English dictionary in the 1940s after World War II. Because it was used extensively during World War II. One, because they were using Morse code.
Morse code, yeah.
The other was when the enemy intercepted the message, they wouldn't understand what it meant. So let's have a think about that for a second. For somehow we think using acronyms is an efficient way to communicate in business, and it's not. It's extremely inefficient. If every single person around the table understands the acronym, then yes, that is efficient. But the moment you start going out of your little bubble, you want to make sure that everyone understands it.
What happens is it becomes a habit, and then you start using those acronyms when you're in front of customers and other experiences. We're building a house at the moment, and we're dealing with a wardrobe construction company, and they have all these letters that mean all these different things, and we can't get our head around, is this, is it that, is it the other? That's not customer friendly. That's not consumer friendly. It's an internal language that this organization's used for themselves, but it doesn't translate to a customer. And I see organizations do that all the time. They actually do brand damage because they make the consumer feel stupid.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. And again, some organizations do that deliberately, because, I reckon the finance industry do it Some of the consulting firms do it because then the clients are so confused that they feel like, oh my God, I don't even know what to do. So I need your services.
If I came to you as an executive keen to improve my skills, what would be some of the practical things that you would, let's say I'm quite introverted, I'm quite shy, I'm not a natural storyteller because it doesn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that you would be suggesting I practice?
Yeah, well, practice is right at the end. So what I do with senior people is, first of all, I never start with the story. It's always, what's your message? What do you want to be known as? And so for an individual, for example, and this can be for individual or a whole company, is what do you want to be known for is normally around your values. So, even as a leader, what do you want to be known as innovative, or do you want to be known as collaborative? Or so helping them get clear on what they want to be known for. And then I do take them through that process of like, well, what do you mean by that? So when you say collaborative, what do you actually mean by that? And then you're drilling down into like probably 2 or 3 or 4 different messages that fall under the collaborative. Then I take them through the process of how they think of all these potential stories they could share. So even from when they were a kid. So, think of your earliest memory and then go through your life and think of all these things that have happened to you. And it's almost matching them. And I go, okay, so I've got a story around this that could work for that. So again, really quick example. I remember I did work with a CEO of one of the large professional service firms. And one of the things their company was doing 3 major pillars in the strategy. And one was community. One was all about giving back to community. And so I was sitting down with him and go, well, why is this important to you? And I just kept asking questions and, get to the point where he said, growing up as a kid, his mum, every time he grew up in a pretty small community, and every time someone was sick, his mum would make casseroles for the whole family. And he goes, and I still remember, me and my brothers having to walk behind mum, taking all the foods. And he just sort of, that was the way he was brought up, that you would always give back to the community. And he told me so many other stories about his parents doing this. So he was raised this way. So what he started to do is share that personal story about why community is important. And then, of course, he would tell this is why we're doing this at the company. This is why we're supporting this. And he would tell the personal story and then bring in the work-related story. So I truly believe that the personal story actually gives you credibility in what you're talking about. And it's not just like, towing the company line.
Yeah, it's that combination of head and heart, logic and emotion. But it's about, and we've had previous podcasts where we've explored some of these similar issues. So it's beautiful to see this theme coming out, that it's not just all logic, that it's also bring your heart, bring your emotion, bring that connection, which is part of the storytelling, is bring both of those together to create that alchemy to get the message across.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're humans. Humans make decisions based on emotion, and they use logic to justify. So, whether you're buying the latest iPhone or a pair of shoes or a house, or you're buying into working for a company or working for a leader or buying into a strategy, you will do that on emotion. And therefore the logic needs to be there. Of course it needs to make logical sense. But the problem we make in business is we just lead with logic and we stay with logic, and we get really frustrated that people aren't getting it, or they're not changing, or so it's because
haven't they read the P&L? Don't they know?
And so we have this ridiculous bias in business towards logic. We think logic does a hell of a lot more than it does. And I've said before, all logic does is inform people. It doesn't influence and engage them. And that's like, so you've got to have both. You've got to have both. And we just, got to even up that ledger, because at the moment it's too heavily weighted for logic. And that's why we get frustrated why people don't, why aren't they doing this? It makes such logical sense. It was like, yeah, well, tell a story.
It's really got to be up to the top down as far as making people feel comfortable to be able to tell their story, because if they don't see it, they're not going to feel comfortable doing it. So if the manager isn't opening up and, telling a story about a situation or explaining something, then the team is not going to feel the same. And
Absolutely.
they're going to close up. So the training really does have to start at the top. And it's probably, like, if you think about the industries around and at the top, there are people who probably haven't been willing to open up about, because they've been learning that, don't speak out of turn, or don't tell people anything personal, or don't show your emotions, that will show weakness, and be careful. So they've got all that. So they really need to start over again and go, okay, if you want your team to open up and this to be an environment where we can share stories, effective stories and things, then they need to see that the younger ones need to see that the older ones are doing it, so that they have that cue that it's okay in this culture.
Yeah, 100% correct. It was like, and the vast majority of the work I do is we start with the senior exec team, and then I go down to the next level, because I have where storytelling fail. So if people go like, how does it fail? I can guarantee you where it fails is when the CEO and the senior leadership team think they don't need the training. Everyone else needs this training, not us. And I just sit there and go, big mistake, because normally, if anyone's going, oh, I don't need storytelling, I've been doing it for years, I can guarantee you they might be doing it for years, but not effectively. But then exactly what that happens, Judith, is I train the next level down, and they're willing to give it a go, maybe in their teams. But if they don't see their senior leaders sharing it, there's almost this thing going, is it really acceptable to do this? And they just sort of stop doing it. So, yeah.
Why do they do it? Like, why do they go to the time and effort and expense to do it if they're not willing to learn it themselves? You kind of go, well, what, are you just going through the motions for your team, and then you're not going to show them that you're in it with them?
I had a CEO call me in, and he wanted the top 40 people in his team to learn storytelling. And he said, because I've been communicating the strategy for about 6 months and they don't get it. And I'm sitting there going, so you want them to do communication training? And he didn't want to be included in it. And it was just like, that is madness. So again, he's thinking, I don't need. And as soon as he told me, and I went, but you're the one that needs it, because you're clearly not communicating the strategy to them. And then they, of course, then need it, because they then need to communicate it down. But I don't know what's going on there.
That's unreal. Those people, if I put my headhunter hat back on, those people where he won't, where he's making them go through the process, but he won't, and they don't understand the story, they're in the danger zone. They're probably looking for other jobs, being headhunted or whatever, because they're going, well, why do I have to do that if he's not doing this? And he's not explaining, it's not my fault, it's his fault.
Do you ever feel like a counselor? Like, because it's you're taking people to places that for them in that moment is a scary place for them to go, because they're feeling exposed. They don't want to look there. They don't want to dig there. They've never had to look or dig because their inner world doesn't operate that way. Do you ever feel like you're counseling?
Sometimes, yes. But what I don't want people to think is storytelling is about going really deep and sharing stuff that you wouldn't want to share. I've had times, and I don't do a lot of one-on-one work anymore because my calendar just doesn't allow it. I've had times when I've worked with, senior leaders, and they've shared stories, and I'm just going, you're not ready to share this. You don't want to be sharing this. You certainly don't want to be sharing it, at the forum next week in front of 200 people. So advising them on what stories to share and not to share, but they're not the deepest, darkest fears ones. It's so let me give you an example. I think we've been talking about storytelling, but I haven't given you an example, because I think this is a great example of what I mean by business storytelling. And it doesn't necessarily need to be about showing vulnerabilities or going deep at all. It's your simple, almost day-to-day stories that work. So I'll give you an example that I use all the time in my workshops, because I love it. So I did some work. This was going back 10, 12 years ago with the risk team. So the entire risk team. The head of risk, her name was Rosemary. And Rosemary said to me that one of the biggest challenges she has is when she's communicating risk management to all the business units she supports. She goes, every time risk is raised, they just look at me and go, you're the risk manager. That's your job. And she said, it doesn't matter how many times I've told them it's not my job. My job is to help you manage risk. She goes, it just, the message doesn't get through. She sort of said, I've given case study after case study, example after example. So she's been using logic to try to convince them that they need to take control of the risk, that, all she can do is help them like manage their risks, but it wasn't changing. So this is the story she started to share. She said, when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm. And growing up on a farm, there was all these dangers we needed to be aware of, but mum would teach us what to do. So we knew what to do if we ever came across redback spiders in the timber heap, and we knew about the potential traps in the dam after heavy rain, and we knew what to do if we came across a snake in summer. And I remember this really hot day, mum was yelling at me to get my bike from the front gate because we were having visitors over for lunch or something. And so I ran down the path and then I just froze because in front of my bike was this massive copperhead snake. But I remembered everything mum taught us to do. So I played statues and I slowly walked backwards until there was enough space between me and the snake, and I ran back to the house to tell mum. And I'm sharing this with you because it reminds me of the role we play in risk. All I can do is give you the skills, knowledge, and advice. So when you come across your own copperhead snake, regardless of what that looks like, you will know what to do.
Love it.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And
Beautiful.
so can I ask you 3 yes or no questions after that story? Does that help you understand the role of a risk manager better?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes. Absolutely.
Do you think you'll remember that story?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, you will. And again, there's a whole lot of research that shows that a story only has to slightly tap into emotion and we'll remember it. And do you think you could retell that story without losing its meaning? You wouldn't have to do it word for word, but do you think you could retell it without losing the meaning?
Probably.
So.
Yes.
Yeah, I reckon you could do. So when you think about it, when you think about anyone, whether it's a leader or a salesperson or someone communicating to the board or to stakeholders, when you're communicating, your biggest challenges are, do people understand it? Like really understand what they're saying? Can they remember it when the presentation's over, the meeting's finished, the conversation's ended? Can they actually remember it? And if they had to, could they retell it to other people without losing its meaning? And a story, a personal story, a simple little personal story like that will give you traction on those 3 things where, facts, figures, all very interesting at the time, but very, very hard to remember.
Yeah, and I was captured visually as well, I think.
Yeah, so Christina, one of the things I, sort of say, did you visualize it? What a story does is helps you visualize, and without you even knowing, it's tapped into emotion, without you even knowing. And so that's what a good story is. It helps people visualize and feel something, which means they're more likely going to remember it and then actually do something different, like actually do something different or think something different or feel something different. And again, especially like when you're leading change or, trying to change behavior or trying to change culture, you got to get people to think something different, do something different or feel something different. And if you're just using logic to try to do that, good luck.
Big fail. Yeah, big fail.
It's also very powerful for presentations.
Oh, it's if you're doing a presentation, I reckon the most powerful ways you could start a presentation is with a personal story.
Yeah.
So imagine if, Rosemary was doing a presentation on risk management, like the first thing out of her mouth is to, when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm, tell that story. And then literally, what I want to talk to you today is about helping you identify all the potential copperhead snakes in your business. And almost the copperhead snake becomes the metaphor for risk. And you would just start with that story and just keep referring back to the copperhead snake throughout. And of course, you're going to have lots of facts and data and case studies and examples and insights, but the story is what will get everyone engaged and connected from the start.
And hooked in quickly. Yeah, that's the thing. I was listening straight up.
Yep. Yeah, because as humans, we are hardwired to listen to stories. So I get so many people go, oh, but could stories work with, the finance team or and I go, if your audience is human, They are hard. And now, that might be debatable in some instances. I don't know, but they are hardwired to listen to stories, and they can't. You can't, when it's in your DNA. You can't go, oh, that's a story. Not listening to that.
Which is why we love music, and why we love movies, and why we love all of those sorts of things. Because why we storytelling.
Yep, why we love going out with our friends, and we don't. And people go, well, can you tell too many stories? You don't go out with your friends over dinner and you're speaking for 3 hours. It's just story after story after story. No one goes, oh, hang on a minute, I'm sick of stories. Can someone show me a Gantt chart? Like, no, we're not doing that. But yeah.
So I would imagine that there's probably a lot of kids these days, especially the ones that have gone through university online, and now they're going to go into the work environment. What kind of advice would you give them about going in there and being not afraid to tell a story or to tell something, and how they should maybe address it? Or
yeah, look, you're right. I think, I've got 2 teenage daughters, 19 and 22, and especially the 19-year-old, extremely confident, but this like, I've just got to speak to someone. It's giving me anxiety. And I was like, and, there's no denying that she spent the last 3 years, not even at school. So I think that's not an easy fix. I think that would come with wisdom. I don't think there's many 18 or 19-year-olds that just are really confident about speaking to people. So I think that will come. The storytelling could absolutely use. What I would do for young people, especially entering the workplace for the first time, use stories. Even though you may not have any work experience, use stories from either when you were playing sport or doing dancing. Or I was speaking to someone the other day, a 21-year-old, and she was going for her first management job. And just by chance, she was telling me because she's quite tiny, she used to be a cox in a rowing boat. And I went, oh my God, use that as an example, because that is the ultimate position of leadership. You are literally directing people that cannot see where they're going. And so it's thinking about how you could use those stories to go, oh, actually, that is a really good example of leadership, or that is a really good example of time management, or, whatever it is. And so that's what I would say to young people. Don't think, oh, I don't have any stories because I don't have any work experience. The better stories are the ones that aren't related to work, and that you make them related to work.
Okay. Christina, what would you advise?
I think a key message in all of this for me is that storytelling is a critical skill. It's not a soft thing that you can dismiss. It's actually one of the core skills that you need to invest in and be intentional about, alongside the other skills that you're building. So don't trivialize it. This is actually core to your leadership.
Mm. And it has, the other cool, it has so many applications. Like, it is for presentations, it's for team meetings, it's for coaching sessions. Use it with your family and kids. God, it's so many applications. Job interviews, anything.
Absolutely. And the thing is with the young ones going in for the first time, they do have a ton of stories that they could probably draw on from high school, when they were in the debating team, or they were in team sports, or they helped their little brother or sister with a project. And actually speaking to somebody about that, like even when they're going through their resume process, speaking to somebody about because a lot of them will say, I don't know what my achievements are. I don't know I don't have anything. And then you find out, yes, they do. They actually do have quite a lot of things, which then, if it's down on paper, when they do get asked, they can start remembering some of these things that they have done that might not have been a job, but it might have been, maybe they worked with their parents doing charity work. There's all those types of things I think can add value. But we could talk about this. We could tell stories. Oh boy, could we tell stories, couldn't we? Our whole life is built on stories. But thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And it was a lot of fun. And, we'd love to have you back and tell some more stories in the future.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you, ladies.
Thanks.
Thanks. For more information about Every Step and our guests, head to everysteppodcast.com. To be notified of new podcasts, please subscribe via your favourite listening platform. And of course, follow us on social media and direct message us to share your ideas about guests or topics.